Hey everybody, we're doing another topic video this week. I asked you guys what is a sequel that you consider really disappointing or one you just really don't like. Before we get into that, as always, I will plug my website. It is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist and I do commission portraits and I sell prints of my work. If that's something you are interested in, you can always go to the shop below or you can email me. My email is in the description box below if you have any questions about a commission or a print. Okay, Jurassic Park 2. No context there. I'm going to assume, and just my old ass is thinking, like Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World, the one from the 90s. I have not seen any of the new versions of them, the Chris Pratt versions. Actually, that's the very first Jurassic Park film I ever saw. And I think it was just timing. It came out in what, like 97, 98, I'm gonna guess. And that was just kind of like the perfect time. So yeah, I didn't see the original Jurassic Park until later. And once I saw it, I was like, wow, okay, this is everything that I wish that The Lost World was. It had whimsy, it had nostalgia, it was really thrilling, like just seeing the dinosaurs, the wonderment of it. It was very, very Spielberg. And The Lost World is just like, ugh, it's ugly. It's like ugly, it looks almost like it's rotting. The colors are just really like dark and everything just feels very damp, just muddled. There's a lot of monotony, nothing to break all that up. Nothing that gives us a sense of like, wow, look at these dinosaurs. Never once did I feel that. They always kind of felt flat on the screen. The characters sucked. I just remember everything really sucking about it. And even as a child, you know how when you're a kid, you really like something, but you also know it's kind of bad? It's like, you know that there are things about it that really suck, but you just, you're a kid, you have nothing better to do, so you just keep watching it. I always remember watching Lost World and like the third act of it when it becomes essentially Godzilla and the T-Rex is just like terrorizing the town. And yeah, even as like an 8-year-old child, I was like, this is bullshit. But yeah, really surprising that Steven Spielberg made the film. Clearly it was a cash grab because it's drained of all the wonderment that one might expect from him. When I was a kid though, my brother and I, we used to, and our friends, we would like tip over our beds. Remember the scene with the trailer where it's like hanging off the cliff and like Sarah is on like, she's about to fall into the water? We used to recreate that scene all the time. Don't know why, but we did. Wonder Woman, 1984. Not a terrible movie, but more bad and disappointing. Following up the first movie is no easy feat, but it was too long of a movie, being 2.5 hours long, along with various amount of plot holes and questions that aren't answered at all. Also miscasting the villains. I think Michael Shannon would have been a better Maxwell Lord than Pedro Pascal, and I think Charlize Theron would have been a better Cheetah than Kristen Wiig. Well, I don't think it's the worst sequel of all time. It's a movie that really let me down and underwhelmed me, to say the least. You say it's not a terrible movie. Yeah, it is. I argue that it is. I reviewed Wonder Woman 1984, and I didn't hate the first half of it. It was entertaining in a very cheeky, very silly sort of way. It did have that kind of like Donner 1978 Superman quality to it. That's totally what it was going for, which is great because I love those movies. That's my favorite superhero movie of all time, probably. And live action, at least, would be the Superman 1978. So I like the color. I like, just kind of like the late 70s, early 80s quality to it was fun. And yeah, I mean, like it works because Wonder Woman is compelling and, Chris Pine is compelling. You want to root for them, at least in the first one. But in this second one, I swear, after that halfway point, the movie just became a disaster. I'm not somebody that normally gets very offended, but this movie offended me. It really offended me because of how ham-fisted the message was, how much they were just shoving this political propaganda down our throats in such a nauseating, condescending way. It really, really got under my skin because it just proved how out of touch Hollywood is. They have no clue what they're saying. They have no clue about anything, and yet they're going to preach to us as though they are all-knowing beings. And especially the way that Wonder Woman literally looks at the camera, addresses the fourth wall, and is like, you are the problem. It is your fault we are in this situation. And it was just disgusting. Very typical of the Hollywood elites. And especially if you're going to go for like a Donald Trump-esque villain, you have to do much better than this. And Pedro Pascal, I don't know what he was thinking in this performance. It was really, really annoying and very peculiar. It was almost like Johnny Depp coming onto the set for the first day of Pirates of the Caribbean as Jack Sparrow. but if it were like really bad, like if you know, everything I think worked about Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest in that performance, imagine all of that just failing. That is Pedro Pascal. Yes, Michael Shannon, that would have been a fantastic choice, I think, at least hopefully. You know, everyone knows I love Michael Shannon. And Charlize Theron, that's a very good choice, I think. Kristen Wiig, good Lord. That's another one where I don't understand. You know, I get it. You know, they want somebody that's really nerdy and awkward and silly in that first part. But then she's got to transition and become this like sexy, dominant, badass superhero. And I'm sorry, like, there's nothing about Kristen Wiig ever in her career that makes me feel like she could make that transition convincingly. It's much better if you were to pick somebody that's already really beautiful and fierce and dominant and just give her some glasses or something and, like, you know, like a lab coat. And then she becomes, you know, like Michelle Pfeiffer in, you know, like Batman Returns. Harley Quinn is another example. It's more comic book, but yeah, Kristen Wiig trying to be sexy. It was very cringy. I felt embarrassed watching the film. Yeah, Charlize Theron, much better choice. I do agree with everything that you're saying here in terms of, you know, like it's way too long and, you know, there's a lot of plot holes. Nothing really makes sense. It's a completely sloppy story. And yet none of that seems to matter to me like it normally would just because of how much I hated that second half of the film. Attack of the Clones is just a lifetime romance in space with a couple CGI-ridden fights towards the end, but I may have more of a distaste for the third of the prequels, okay, because it's the one people say is best, even though it's as much of a visual and audible conundrum as the two films before it. Yeah, I mean, I do agree that the third one is the best one of those prequels, but all of them visually, just the CGI, the aesthetic of everything does not work. It does not hold up, I will say, any of them. But yeah, you know, it's very interesting because when I look at all three films, I look at The Phantom Menace just in terms of like a narrative perspective, just building a film. And it is one of the biggest conundrums for me. It is one of the most bewildering things because it's like everything that you could possibly do wrong with a script, they did. It was like everything that you are taught, you know, as somebody, like as a script writer, as a director, it's like they went against every single rule. And, you know, I don't mind breaking some rules, but this was just unbelievable. It's baffling. It's baffling when you try to break it apart. That said, I think Attack of the Clones is worse. It's cleaner. It's a cleaner story. It's not nearly as chaotic and just completely scatterbrained as Phantom Menace. And yet, it is the love story that is just so awful and so something that, you know, love stories and chemistry, you know, George Lucas should not be anywhere near any of that. This is not what he's meant to do. And it's really, really cringy. I remember thinking it was cringy even when I was 12 years old. And yes, I did see the movie like, 7 times in theaters, but, you know, it's very hard also when you're not good at casting and you cast people like Hayden Christensen and Natalie Portman who are just completely wooden in their performances. And, you know, I think even the great actors would struggle with these roles. But yeah, Attack of the Clones is very embarrassing. Out of the many sequels and different takes in the James Bond series, Die Another Day is always going to be on the people's least favorite list due to its insanity, I'm guessing is what you said there. The stark difference with Casino Royale released right after shows just how poor and out of touch Die Another Day was as the first 21st century James Bond film. Yeah, it is really amazing to see the difference between the two films because Casino Royale, for my money, it's probably my favorite James Bond film, or up there. And I do remember seeing Die Another Day whenever it came out. I was, again, probably 11 or 12 years old, and I remember thinking, okay, it's time to wind down this Pierce Brosnan era of James Bond. It is very, very silly. It's the kind of silly, though, that is not offensive, I don't think. It's the kind of silly that I think to a certain degree can be laughed at and you can still have a fun time. But yeah, I mean, it is really bad. The thing that just keeps coming up in my mind is that disappearing car in the snow, the invisible car, fantastic. And of course, the Madonna Die Another Day song, one of the great Bond themes ever written, absolutely. But yeah, certainly it was time to take things in a new direction. I think the Die Another Day really kind of got lost in this like real cheesy kind of like 1970s era. It's like, we're not going to take it that seriously. And I think that Casino Royale kind of found that balance of everything. And that's why I like it so much. Halle Berry was in this movie and she was awful. I have not seen this movie since it came out, but I just remember her being absolutely horrible. One of the worst Bond girls I think I've ever seen. She tried so hard to be sexy. Yes. The Godfather Part III. From what I remember, it betrays the character of Michael Corleone by making him more like a lovable uncle, at least more than he should be. Granted, the time elapsed between the second and third movies is enough to justify this change in theory, and the idea was most likely to show him going away from the anger and seriousness of his youth that wore down on him after all those years. However, we do not see that progressive transition, and are simply given the end result, which seems especially jarring and unwarranted after the ending of the second film. That's the biggest issue. That and the god-awful lightning that trades the strong visual identity of the first and second films with a cheap TV drama look. It's not the worst film ever. It can probably be considered good on its own, but as a conclusion to the Godfather trilogy, it's a monumental fail from grace. You broke my heart, Francis. This here is actually one of the better reviews I have heard for The Godfather Part III. Yes, I think a lot of people, and I've said this so many times, I'm not a huge fan of The Godfather Part III, certainly not, but I think people need to chill out. It's really not that bad. It's just, when you compare it to the original film, yeah, of course it's not anywhere in the same league, and you know, I'm one of those people who's not the biggest fan of Godfather Part II. I like certain parts of it a lot, but overall it just never really worked for me. Certainly didn't affect me emotionally like the original did. So I don't know, I guess the third one doesn't bother me as much, but I totally agree with you. That was the big glaring issue, was the way that Al Pacino just really changed the performance. And yes, you know, I thought the same thing when you know, it could be justified to a degree. So much time has passed, and yet, you know, something just wasn't clicking, especially after that incredible performance, that incredible arc from Michael Corleone in the second film. I really like his relationship with Kay in the third film. I think that's kind of an underrated aspect of things. I like that they got to a point where they really did have a mutual respect for each other, and how she really gets him in a way that very few people do. All that I really like. But yeah, you know, not a great movie, and you know, some of it is very cartoony, and it clearly does not have the same visual power of the originals. But you know, as I've said, I love the end of this film. I really do. Even though, you know, it could have been executed a little bit better, I think it is one of the more affecting endings to a mob film, mob story. You know, I honestly, it reminds me, it's chilling in the way that like the end of The Sopranos is. The final episode of The Sopranos, just because it faces mortality in such a dark, dismal way. I love the idea of Michael. You know, you see that montage of him dancing with all the women in his life, his first wife, and then Kay, and then his daughter, and then he's all alone, and he just dies in a wide shot. That is very, very effective. If only the rest of the movie could have been on that level. Space Jam 2. The first movie wasn't great, but it had a purpose. It tried something new. Not only did it mesh the biggest name in the basketball with Looney Tunes, the story also tied in with Michael Jordan's real life, moved to golf, and to return to the NBA. I think you mean baseball. He moved to baseball, but anyway. The sequel is essentially an advertisement on what WB owns. Even the quality of the animation has dropped significantly. I can't list out more reasons before this turns into an essay, and it would have to be an essay. Yeah, I mean, look, both movies, Space Jam and Space Jam 2, they are cash grabs. That's the whole point of them. So they can kind of have fun with it. They can be funny and be kind of like, it's like a satire, a very meta sort of satire. But, you know, the original just, you know, it had more body to it. It had more of a story and an emotional arc. They took their time a little bit more, you know, for Space Jam. And Space Jam 2 really just kind of reflects where the world is at, I think, just in terms of being bombarded with all kinds of things, with copyrighted information, copyrighted entities all coming towards you. I think one of the most bone-chilling moments, it will probably go down as one of the most bone-chilling moments of 2021 in terms of the movies I saw, was the moment when you saw all those WB characters coming down that mountain, that hill, whatever, in an avalanche. I remember sitting there and watching the movie, and I was just like, oh my God. Like I died inside a little bit. I don't get scared of horror movies very often, but this this was terrifying. It's so lost in the meta, the references, that it becomes reference on top of reference. It's just like there's no point to anything. It's just so much. It is so overstuffed. It is alarming. And when you watch the trailer, that's just a taste of what you are going to experience in the movie itself. And yeah, I like that they were able to tie things in with Michael and his arc. Like with baseball, he lost his passion for basketball and then he finds it again. Whereas this film, you don't really feel any sort of physicality, no sense of the love of basketball, no sense of anything. It's all just digital CGI, just shoved in your face. And maybe I'm just old and bitter, but seeing decade by decade the way that product placement just owns these big blockbuster movies to the points where they're not even movies anymore, I find it sad. American Psycho 2. The original American Psycho is one of the most important films to come out of the American canon. Christian Bale gives an incredible performance. American Psycho 2 lacks any satirical edge of the original. They start off the film with Patrick Bateman being slain by the awful protagonist of the sequel. The acting, the direction, writing, and soundtrack are abysmal. What was Mila Kunis thinking? The very existence of American Psycho 2 is a complete insult to cinephiles everywhere. So, I knew of the existence of a sequel, but I knew nothing of it. So I'm learning all of this right now. Mila Kunis is in it. Really interesting. But yeah, I've avoided it for a reason. I heard it was terrible, and like you, I think American Psycho is one of the great movies, one of the great American movies of the 21st century. It just gets almost everything right. Couple things here and there that are on the nose, but other than that, just a perfect satire. And so yeah, when I hear about sequels like this, I kind of don't want it to tarnish my impressions of the original. That being said, what you're saying here is a little bit intriguing. Part of me is curious. Every Rocky after the first, except the 2006 one. But what about the one, is it Rocky 3? I really don't even remember. The one where they're like on the mountain with the snow and then there's that like robot computer thing. That one was fantastic. I don't know what you're talking about. You cannot leave that one out. It's an obvious answer, but The Matrix Reloaded / Revolutions really tarnished the genius of the original film by corrupting the franchise into amateur religious allegories. Even without that schlep, they're just weaker films by regular merits. The first film made the agents have such a palpable sense of danger, but Reloaded opens with Neo effortlessly dispatching 3 agents at once while cracking jokes. There was no real tension anywhere in that movie, all style over substance. Granted, the stylistic decisions were pretty memorable / good. We also owe the Matrix films for the incredible, annoying trend of splitting movies into 2, later taken on by Harry Potter, Hunger Games, and Twilight, or maybe that was Kill Bill. Yeah. I think most people agree that Reloaded and Revolutions are bad, very disappointing compared to the original Matrix. I love the original Matrix. It's one of those movies that will always be one of my favorites, admittedly. And it is one of the best of the Wachowskis did. Just the older they got, or the Wachowskis, the more cartoony they got, the more silly. And, that can be fun at times, but yeah, with The Matrix, as you said, a lot of it became very talky, very expository, very amateur kind of religious allegories as you're describing here. And, it felt like referencing The Phantom Menace again. The scene where Anakin Skywalker asks Qui-Gon about midichlorians. He's like, I've been wondering, what are midichlorians? And you're watching that scene and it just feels like your childhood died inside. And yeah, that's kind of how the entirety of like The Matrix Reloaded feels to me. It's like the whole movie is describing the midichlorian count, but in the context of The Matrix. I don't need long Wikipedia-style monologues to explain to me every little thing. Sorry. I needed a lot more tension. The CGI was really bad. It really removed us from everything, again, compared to that original. I will say, though, I do like that freeway, that the highway chase sequence. It's very, very long in Reloaded. It is really, really silly. It is just cartoony as hell, and the CGI is really bad, but I don't know. There's something about it that it might just be a nostalgic thing, but I enjoy it. I love the horror of Aliens, so seeing Aliens go more in an action direction with more cheese was slightly disappointing. Certainly not a bad movie, but that first movie is just head and shoulders, I'm guessing, head and shoulders above its sequel because of its atmosphere and tension. None of the sequels have come close to capturing that original terror. Okay, so yeah, you're probably one of the only other people I've ever heard say that, because I agree with you. I think I could have really enjoyed Aliens if I had never seen the original film, because it's a good film. You know, it's like James Cameron is very good at what he does. He's very good at that kind of action schlock, but really elevating it into something sophisticated. So this is perfect, that sci-fi quality. But yeah, when you watch the original Alien, it is so different. It is so much more in the mind. It's more about what you don't see, the anticipation, the tension, the body horror. There's much more a terror to that film. And I love it. You know, like I really live for that kind of stuff. To me, there's nothing more exciting than making like sci-fi horror in space like that. Even like in Cowboy Bebop, the episode Toys in the Attic, I always had a soft spot in my heart for that one, obviously pulling very heavily from something like the original Alien. But yes, Aliens, it's just so different. The tonal shift is quite jarring for me. And I don't know, as somebody who really, really loves that, again, that more cerebral, more that tension building, this just didn't satisfy me. But again, I totally recognize that I'm in the minority and that you are in the minority, but I appreciate your response. But yeah, so those are a few answers. Thank you guys so much for writing in, and thank you so much for watching. If you look over here, you will see my Patreon supporters. Thank you guys. As always, if you are interested in becoming a patron, the link to support that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.